Can you hear me? It's not on? There we go. It's like magic. Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Deborah Gonzalez. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs at PPIC, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our fifth event of our 2025 Speaker Series on California's future. We are delighted to present today's conversation on redistricting in California featuring Kauffman Strategy President Gail Kauffman, PPIC Director and Senior Fellow Eric McGee, and Stutzman Public Affairs Founder and President Rob Stutzman. Thank you for being here today with us. Joining them is PPIC President and CEO Tani Cantil-Sacco-Ue. As many of you know, for 12 years prior to her joining PPIC, she served as the Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court. We still call her Chief sometimes. It's just a habit. This event is part of the 2025 Speaker Series on California's future. We'd like to thank the sponsors of this series for their underwriting support. Their support makes for these events a free and available lunch, which I hope you're enjoying, and they're free to the public. These organizations are listed on the screens and the programs on your table. This series is also funded by the PPIC Donor Circle and the PPIC Corporate Circle, groups of individuals and organizations that provide generous support to PPIC. Please visit the PPIC website to find information on how you can join PPIC as a sponsor or a donor. Before we begin, there are a few items to mention. For those of you who are not familiar with PPIC, we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit policy research institution with offices in San Francisco and Sacramento. I'm partial to the Sacramento office, as the team knows, because I'm in the Sacramento office. And as a public charity, PPIC does not take or support positions on any ballot measure or legislation, nor does it support, endorse, or oppose any political parties, candidates for public office. At the end of today's program, there'll be time to respond to audience questions. For those of you who are in the audience, you could raise your hand and the PPIC staff will come to you with a microphone. They won't let that microphone go, I just want to warn you, so don't try it. And for those of you who are joining with us virtually, please send an email to ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. PPIC staff will be monitoring the questions that come in and incorporating them as much as possible. Lastly, if you haven't already, please silence your cell phones. Now on to the program. I'm pleased to turn it over to our PPIC President and CEO, Tani Cantil-Sacco-Ue.
Thank you, Deborah, for that introduction, and welcome. It's a pleasure to see all of you, and I know many of you come to our lunches and use the information in your daily lives. We're also very pleased to have McClatchy High School students here at our front tables with their teacher, who are part of our PPIC Cal Civics program, learning about issues that affect them now and in the future. Thank you. Should you need anything during our program, please feel free to contact any of our PPIC staff who are seated throughout the room. And if they're not too shy, please raise your hand to see where we are. There we are in the back and in the front and on the sides. Please let us know if you need anything. I'm very pleased today to have this exciting conversation with some of California's most successful and effective consultants, our state issues, and with Eric McGee, our senior fellow, who is an expert on elections at PPIC. I'm going to read a little bit about each one of them, but you should go to our website for their full biographies to really understand, to do them justice about the opinions they will render here today. I'm going to do this alphabetically and start with, to my left, Gail Kauffman. She is a Democratic issue-based initiative consultant in California. She and her firm, Kauffman Strategies, has led some of the state's most significant and successful initiative campaigns. She has a history of leadership in the Assembly since Willie Brown tapped her to be the first woman director of the California State Assembly Speaker's Office of Majority Services. Thank you, Gail. Next, we have in the middle Eric McGee. He is a senior fellow here with us at PPIC and is the policy director for Understanding California's research initiative. That initiative explores key trends and challenges facing the state. He is an expert in elections and electoral reform, and his work has been profiled on The Washington Post, The New York Times, The Economist, and NPR. He is the creator of a widely used measure for identifying gerrymandering. The measure is called, quote, the efficiency gap, end quote. Next, we are excited to have Rob Stutzman, founder and president of Stutzman Public Affairs, a firm based on specializing in campaigns, communications, and crisis management. His firm excels in strategic campaigns and has served high-profile individuals and Fortune 500 companies. He was Deputy Chief of Staff for Communications for Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. And prior to that, he worked at the California Department of Justice and the Attorney General's Office. Welcome, and thank you, all of you.
Thank you, Chief.
My first question goes to you, Eric. In 2008, we had Prop 11, where California voters created its independent California Citizens Redistricting Commission to remove legislative map drawing from the legislature. Then 2 years later, we had Prop 20, where California voters created the California Citizens Redistricting Commission to redraw congressional districts following each census. Can you tell us about the history of these reforms, especially Prop 20 regarding congressional districts, and what have been the effects?
Yeah, so the California's history leading up to the adoption of the commission, the few decades before that, was really one of sort of partisan conflict and partisan stalemate. So they, every 10 years, the two parties would duke it out over redistricting, and then in the end, you know, they would probably basically fight it to a draw. That all culminated, in the process of that, there were actually a number of redistricting commission measures that were considered on the ballot. The primary motivation behind that was from the Republican side. So the Republican Party was really the party of redistricting reform at this time. And then this all kind of culminated in 2001 with a handshake deal between Democrats and Republicans to protect all incumbents of both parties. And you ended up with a pretty uncompetitive map. In the congressional case, only one seat changed hands over the ensuing 10 years. And so if there was sort of a bipartisan deal to protect incumbents, there was also something of a bipartisan backlash to that deal. And initially, there was actually another initiative to reform the process coming from the Republican side that failed. And then there was this kind of broad bipartisan coalition that came together to pass the first stage of the redistricting reform in 2008, which just applied, as you said, to the state legislature and the Board of Equalization. And then 2 years later came the congressional version, and that passed with a much wider margin. The initial maps that first commission drew were pretty much better than the existing maps on almost every dimension, because the 2001 maps were drawn with one purpose in mind, which was to protect incumbents. So the new maps were more competitive. They had better representation for voters of color. They had fewer sort of strangely shaped districts. They did a little bit better job of protecting cities and counties, keeping them whole within a given district. And then we've had another commission more recently that has been sort of the second round of this process and really kind of kept things at largely the status quo of what happened in 2011.
Thank you, Eric. This is a question, as a preliminary question before I ask each of you specific questions. So this is for whoever wants to answer it, or both of you. And that is, I understand Prop 50 is titled the Election Rigging Response Act. What election was rigged? Can anyone describe the nature of that title?
Well, I'll try. I didn't make it up. I think the word election represents a redistricting election that is coming up, like Prop 50. Rigging is a word we've heard repeatedly from this president and others, so I think it was used intentionally. Can't swear to it. And the point, obviously, is to reinforce, which we'll get into, the fact that there are states all over the country. The vice president is in Indiana today trying to rig that redistricting. So if you want to use that word, you can. You can also say they're doing a mid-decade redistricting, which is what they said in Texas.
Thank you. Rob, did you want to respond?
Well, I would just add that rigging is not a technical term, it's clearly a political term. Because this is one of the most political things that happen in American politics, is redistricting. And politicians of either party have always exerted their power historically to protect their own interests or their own party's interests. So so it's not surprising that in the title that the legislature gave this for the ballot that they would use a political term because that's what they're after, is to succeed politically.
I appreciate those answers. So Gail, this question is to you. The issue of redistricting has been in the news of late nationally, as you've alluded to. Could you explain the larger national forces that are influencing the creation of Prop 50 and also its timing and who supports and who opposes 50?
Sure, I'll try, and I'll try and be brief. National forces, I can't imagine what that could be. President Trump has been in office since January. The House and the Senate are very close in terms of margins, with the Republicans holding both at the moment, but by very small margins. In the last 9 months, there's been any number of things that have changed in this country, the most important being norms. I'd say that we're no longer looking at a country that's 50 states, as in the United States of America. We're not looking at the country in that lens. We're really looking, as the president continues to say, at blue states and red states. And I have been doing this a long time. We have never called the country blue states and red states. And I think Prop 50 emanates from there. I would just add that whether you agree with me politically or not, there has been a dramatic loss of the congressional ability to set policy and budgetary decisions, and there has been an enormous use of executive orders and executive power instead. We're not here to talk about that, but the election in 26 is all about congressional districts, the number, and who controls Congress, and whether or not Congress will ever have power during Trump's administration to actually do the things they're supposed to do. So I think it's an incredibly important election for that reason.
Gail, can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure. I forgot to talk about supporters and opponents. Sorry.
Well, that's fine too, but I also wondered, you nationally, you may know what states are thinking about this or how many are thinking. You mentioned advances in another state today. Could you also talk a little bit about that?
He's in Indiana for reasons that I think are exactly the same as what started, I think, in Texas, although Missouri has moved as well. When the president started talking to state governors, et cetera, and saying, why don't we look at changing this, call it mid-decade redistricting, so that we can advance additional Republican seats? All kinds of states, both Democratic and Republican, started looking at what was going on in Texas. And every one of the states has a different way of doing redistricting. We are one that does it through a commission, but there's only a few. So I think you've seen multiple states talking about it. Not all of them have been able to do a redistricting that would come into play by the 26th election. And that's kind of, I think, where we are. I just will say this about Indiana. I'll quote Politico from 2 days ago. Top White House officials head to Indiana today to pressure Republicans to gerrymander another congressional district away from Democrats. Vance will be there tomorrow. The new push is coming because White House efforts are, quote, on the verge of stalling in Indianapolis. That's the reality of where we are.
Thank you, Gail. So Rob, for you, and feel free to jump in and respond, but I also want to ask you specifically in your response, what does Proposition 50 do, including how would it change California's current congressional redistricting process, and what's the timing of the new map implementation, and what triggers the new map?
So what 50 does is it takes a new congressional map. It does not address legislative seats. Those stay the same because that's not relevant to who controls Congress. Because Newsom is positioning this as a response to, at the beginning, Texas, and now it's escalated to other states, obviously, as Gail was pointing out about Indiana. I think Missouri has done it as well. It substitutes a map drawn by the majority in the legislature. So the Democrats drew a map. It's a gerrymander. I don't even think they try to hide that. It's obviously what it is. It's what it attempts to do, is to basically give them a maximization of being able to win California congressional seats. What it does at a practical level is basically takes 9 seats that are presently, what it does, first of all, it takes 5 Republican seats, makes probably 3 of those completely unattainable for Republicans in a re-elect next year, and makes 2 certainly into lean Democrat, depending on candidates, et cetera. It then takes other competitive seats that Democrats have had a good cycle with 2 years ago and won some seats, and particularly in Southern California, and pushes those into what's more of a safe Democrat zone, meaning harder for Republicans to try to reacquire those seats in the upcoming election. But it's not just the upcoming election. So this map is the substitute for the rest of the decade. So this will be 3 elections, 26, 28, and 30. So a Trump midterm, a presidential, and then a TBD midterm. And then they say, well, we're going to go back to the commission. Commission kicks back in 30. There is some cynicism about that. Who opposed the Redistricting Commission back in 2010 was the Democrat Party. And to be clear, if California was a red state, the Republican Party would have vociferously opposed it. There's no ideological thing, I think, to gerrymandering and redistricting. It's both parties seeking power. But it's so basically, though, the career Democrat machine, political machine, that opposed this in 2010 is obviously backing this to their own benefit now. And the question is, well, but do they really come back to the ballot again and just try to push it all away? Because the circumstances that Gail's describing probably don't change in our American politics by the end of the decade. And keep this in mind, for the next decade, blue states, California, Illinois, New York, and other northeastern states are going to shed congressional seats, also electoral votes, primarily to southern states. And they're going to gerrymander those. And so I think we're very likely to be back again with all the emergency we have to respond to in 2030. So the concern is, for those of us that believe in the reform, is that once you backtrack from this, it may be very difficult to actually get back to the commission, the reforms that we have in this state.
Thank you, Rob. Gail?
Just want to comment on one of those things, because I've heard the argument about if we really were only talking about what's going on at this moment, we could have, I'm using we broadly, I had nothing to do with the writing, but those who are supporting it could have written it so that it would only be for the 26th election. That actually makes no sense to me at all. As Rob pointed out, the Texas model, other states are calling it mid-decade Redistricting, that's why I kept saying it. It seems most logical, whether you agree with my politics or not, for those who believe the commission actually was doing the best job possible of doing the lines, that it would go back into effect when the next census happens in 2030, and they would draw the lines after that. So I understand all the cynicism. I understand everybody doesn't trust anybody, and I also understand this is all about politics. But I think it's disingenuous to think that it was put on the ballot and it was put on temporarily with no attempt in the future to bring the commission back. It's very surprising to me that both Mr. Munger and sorry, I forgot to do supporters and opponents, but Charles Munger is basically the one who helped create and push through the first commission, and he is supporting the no side of this. I think it's unfortunate that he doesn't believe that we really would put the commission back. I don't think that's what this is about at all.
Thank you. And this is what I appreciate a lot about both your answers and the PPIC. I mean, Eric is in the middle for a reason. And that is, we can't see the future. What we say in our reports very often, which is one of my favorite lines, is, prophecy is not a projection, or maybe I have that background. Trying to determine the future will be up to you as the voters. But you're hearing both sides of this now, and I'm going to ask Eric some basic questions, and that is, Eric, how many, in the best case scenario of Prop 50 passing, new map, people vote as predicted, how many seats would California gain in Congress? And could you also give us because we have young people here and everyone has a different version, sort of a definition of what gerrymander is. So how many seats would we gain under the new map, and what does gerrymander mean in your definition?
How many Democratic seats?
Yes,
Right,
how many
yeah,
Democratic
yeah.
seats?
So I think in the best case scenario for Democrats, it's probably 5 more seats. And that's assuming an election that is pretty good for the Democrats. That's not a crazy thing to think for 2026, because typically in a midterm election, the party that's not holding the presidency does pretty well. Sometimes it does a little bit well, sometimes it does really well. If it's an election like 2018, when the Democrats picked up 40 seats nationally, then the Democrats would probably get 5 seats out of this plan. Mm-hmm. There is always some uncertainty about these things. These days it's easier to predict how congressional elections will go than it used to be, because the way that a district votes for president is a pretty good predictor, but it's still not perfect. And so if you kind of assume some wiggle room or uncertainty, those numbers could go down a little bit. And then farther out, it's probably, the downside in this plan for Democrats is larger because they've loaded all the competitive seats on their side of the aisle. So that means that the potential to lose seats moving further forward is real, but probably not in 2026. What a gerrymander is and how the kind of mechanics of it is, you just want your side to win its seats by a comfortable but not overwhelming margin, and you want any seats that go to the opposition, if you're drawing the lines, the opposition, you want those seats to be won by overwhelming margins. And the logic behind that is, wherever your supporters are in the state, you want them most efficiently distributed around the districts, so that you're making sure you win the seats that you win, but you're not spending too many of your supporters to win those seats, because if you spent a lot of supporters winning those seats, you could just as easily take them out of that seat and put them somewhere else to help you win another seat besides, right? Mm-hmm. And the opposition should have really overwhelming margins, because they don't need those overwhelming margins to win those seats, but you're going to give them those overwhelming margins anyway, so that they're sort of, if you think about it, they're sort of wasting their voters in those seats, right? And that's, different gerrymanders do it a little bit differently, but that's the basic logic behind any partisan gerrymander.
Thank you. So it's sort of smart math. I only want to win by what I need, and I want the other side to win, if they win, by a diluted vote that kind of could waste a few votes along the way.
Yeah, and if you think about it, any seat that you're winning by a comfortable but not overwhelming margin, there's going to be a lot of people from the other party who are also in that seat and are voting for the loser. And those are also sort of wasted votes in that sense.
Yeah. Very strategic. I appreciate that answer. Thank you. This is for each of you, and in order, Rob or Gail, but more generally, and then this is a sub-question, who wins under the new maps? Who loses under the new maps? And are there any regions or districts that are redrawn in a way that could be objectively characterized as controversial?
I'll
Start?
start, Chief. The Democrats win, which is the whole point of the exercise. Now, nationally, when you look at the Republican states that may be doing this, it nets out, depending on which handicapper you talk to, kind of even or +1 or 2 for the Republicans. There's nothing gospel about that, but in some sense, as a practical matter, California doing this just kind of keeps the Democrats where they're at now, if you will. Look, this decimates rural California. Rural California will not have, let's call it indigenous representation in Congress under these maps. And I think this is a consideration in the exercise of people considering the vote on this, is what are the consequences of alienating people that live, say, in Northern California, that their representative is from a coastal Bay Area city in Marin County or Sonoma County that has nothing in common politically or culturally or even as a community with them. But that's who their representative is going to be. So I think that's a consideration. Republicans in this state are obviously a minority, a substantial minority statewide, but this is also the state that provided the most Republican votes of any state for Donald Trump for president. There is about, Steve Garvey got 42% of the vote for United States Senate. Steve Garvey is the highest Republican vote getter of gross vote ever in California, and that happened in the last election. So you're talking about, let's just, 42% of the state votes Republican in statewide elections. This will reduce, if the Democrats get their best case scenario, this reduces proportional representation in Congress to about 8-9% of Republicans. So you have to, I think, consider what is the consequence of really disenfranchising millions of Californians from representation that they feel like is in the ballpark of representing their interests.
Gail?
Well, I have a little different thought about that. In a shock. First of all, I think that's an overstatement of the case. I think if you look at districts that are competitive, which means neither side has such a huge majority that they feel comfortable, and you watch the behavior of those members, be they Democrats or Republicans, they're very well aware of their constituents' interests as well as how they view things. So I think to give voters credit, they know if they come in and vote either yes or no, the politics of what they're voting on. I also think I haven't made as big a point as I should, that this isn't just about what happens in California, although that was your question. This really is about, we would never have been here if Texas hadn't done what Texas did. If other states were not trying to put more Republicans in play throughout the country to ensure that Congress that there is a more difficult time for Democrats to be competitive for the 26th election, we would not be here. So while we can have a technical conversation about each and every district, I think the broader question is also in play.
So if I could, brief rebuttal, Chief. I agree, this is all about what Texas is doing, and it's not a norm, and I think it's uncomfortable. I don't agree with it. I don't agree with gerrymandering. I support what my former boss helped get into law and passed by the voters, which is the commission we have here in California. Usually when there's a mid-decade or in-decade redistricting, it's because a court has ordered it. So it is not a norm for it to be done politically, like it's being done in Texas. And I agree, we would not be here if not for Texas. But I don't think any of that rebuts what I said about the alienation of all these communities. That's essentially the trade-off. I mean, what the Yes campaign is asking you to do, and it very well may be justified in your mind for your politics. There's a legitimate case for it, I do believe, because of what's at stake, maybe the control of the House. But make no mistake, you are basically doing what they are doing. You're stepping down from the reform patina that we have in California and agreeing to do the terrible thing that the Texas Republicans have started at the behest of the White House. I think that's all correct. But also, we go back to this is always politics. This is the most American political thing, is politicians choosing their voters, which is what now we're starting to backtrack to. By the way, Illinois gerrymandered Illinois. They just happened to do it at the beginning of the decade, because that's what you do when you're in power. They gerrymandered the most anti-Trump Republican congressman, Adam Kinzinger, out of office. I wish he was still in Congress. So everyone does this when they have the opportunity to. Gail talked about norms, and we are destroying a lot of norms by the day in this country. That is all true. To me, this becomes the fascinating question. Are we then going to concede that and do away with our own norms in order to compete for raw political power? And I think there is a reasonable conclusion to that of yes. But that is really what the question is that's before the voters here right now with ballots in our mailboxes.
Can I have one more rebuttal?
Of course, of course.
I just want to read a headline that my son, who's in the back of the room, sent me earlier. Republicans could draw 19 more House seats after an upcoming Supreme Court ruling. The reason I want to read that is when you speak about norms, we haven't really gotten into the depth, and we won't, of the other pieces of redistricting that call for the Voting Rights Act to be considered in the drawing of these lines. The Supreme Court, as of today, took the case. They won't hear it till June, so it won't affect next month's election. But there are 19 more seats if they do what is expected and throw out the Voting Rights Act. So we can get all high and mighty, and we can talk about all kinds of things. And I would completely agree that this is about raw power. But when you have a president who has no problem using it to many people, regardless of party, regardless of economics, regardless of anything, where people are really seeing things they've never seen in this country, I think you have to look at things a little bit different.
So let me ask both of you, United States Supreme Court action aside for the moment, do you see a risk that similar measures mid-district redistricting, mid-decade redistricting, similar measures have been alluded to, could cancel out California's efforts?
Yes, I think that's what the attempt is. I've been a little surprised that the president hasn't been more vocal about what's happening here. I'm not going to try and explain his behavior, but as I said, the vice president is in Indiana today. So, I think that is the point. We're just going to keep upping the ante.
Yeah, I think once this began, it doesn't stop until each side's optimized everything they can do. You can criticize Newsom for, well, California, then that escalated it to these other red states. Actually, I don't think that's a fair criticism of the governor. I think you have to assume that the Republicans would have gone to squeeze seats out of those other states anyway. This is going to be a very close House election. Every seat's going to matter. I also think the governor would have come under intense criticism from his party elsewhere in the country if he hadn't done this. Obviously, he's got the most states that he can do something about. So, there's obviously the question of his own ambition being caught up in this as well. But as a pure just political question, I'm not sure he had much choice because once Texas went, the escalation was on.
Let me ask you now, you both sort of talked about this power and what could happen and the United States Supreme Court decisions that affect its ruling on the Voting Rights Act. It's going to really change up then the votes and the representations in different states. So we see this happening on a national stage and right now in the state stage. But we're talking really about people, the representation of the people's needs, desires, wishes through policies. How do each of you respond to concerns about this raw politicization and some would say manipulation, or the loss of public trust in this kind of exchange that's going on?
I think this is part of the question is where are lines going to be drawn? How much do you have to descend to what you think your opponents are doing in order to compete with them? How do you go back to restoring norms from here? I've already expressed I wouldn't call it skepticism, but concern of how we don't get this restored for the next decade, because there'll continue to be this same demand for it to happen. If this were to lose, I think it'd be California voters starting to express that and express their skepticism about having two wrongs don't make the right, if you will, type of argument. I think the other question, though, is that voters will be considering, especially those that are open to actually thinking this through, so those not on the partisan extremes, does it really deliver what it's saying it will do? I mean, Newsom's in an ad saying, this will stop Donald Trump cold. Does it? Cold of what? Trump doesn't seem to care much about this. There's very little evidence that this will do anything except maybe give the Democrats, a bit of a better chance to compete for a House majority. So the question starts to become, well, if we're going to actually take a step back from this reform that most of us would agree, most Californians would agree as they voted for it, 60 to 40%, is the way to do this. Is it worth stepping back from that virtue for the political payoff? And I think that's a real question. Does this thing really pay off politically? And would voters really say, you know what, we're just not going to do everything. There's certain things we're not going to step back from in order to resist this administration from a California perspective.
And so for purposes of our younger audience members, you're talking about the independent commission for drawing the maps for, the congressional district seats. That was an act that passed in 2010 under Governor Schwarzenegger. Stepping back from that is what you're saying, to where the map is now being drawn by the legislature. Gail, did you want to speak to that point?
Well, I think he did a pretty good job. I didn't agree with it all.
It is
for the record.
It is worth noting, too, that we are in a really extraordinary time in American history in terms of the closeness of the division of the U.S. House of Representatives. So we really have never, in the history, since going all the way back to the founding of the country, we've never really had a period where it's been this close for this long. And I think it's pretty much guaranteed that if one party could build a larger and more durable majority, like has occurred sometimes in American history, all this redistricting stuff would go away. That's what's happened in the past. It hasn't been an issue during periods of time where one party does have that kind of dominant majority. And it's because we're stuck in this kind of back and forth, and neither party can really become like a permanent, stronger majority. They can't build that broader coalition for whatever reason that we are in the world that we're in right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. So my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that one person or maybe two in the legislature drew this map, whereas the independent commission map is drawn by commissioners. They show it, people debate it, it goes back, it goes to the court, it goes up and down. The map is traded around and looked at and criticized throughout its entire process. This is a map that was drawn, I understand, correct me, by one or maybe two people in the legislature, and understandably it had to be, in a prompt and swift fashion because to be timely for the 2026 elections. So should we be concerned about that, and or if not, what are the federal or state safeguards? Yes, Gail.
I think it was a little more than one or two people. I think the thing that we should be looking at a little bit is Voting Rights Acts and other things that were in fact considered. Yes, it was done quickly. Yes, it was done not through all the independent commission elements that you described. But what it was designed to do was to ensure that minority communities, that voting rights concerns, that communities of color, that areas where they could figure out to keep cities, counties together would be, those were in fact considered. Is it the best way possible? You can argue that point. But again, I think you go back to, this is hard for me because we're normally the party that would be arguing the other side. And so I understand this, but I see so much at risk. And I do think before this all started, most political people would have said the Democrats were in line to take the House. And if it wasn't for that, none of this would be happening. We did. It is an off-year election, and there was a lot of momentum starting out of fear of what this president was up to. So those are, in fact, the trade-offs.
Thank you, Gail. Rob.
I don't. We knew who. Look, each side has expert cartographers, if you will. Some who may be in the room. They were hired and worked collaboratively with their client, which was the Democrats in the legislature, in order to do this. Probably members of the congressional delegation as well. But of course they did. That's the whole point. And I agree. I'm not an expert in the Voting Rights Act, but I from everything I've read and understand, as I've gone over these maps, Gail's correct. These were done in such a way, primarily to avoid those type of legal challenges, because there's going to be very little time for these maps to go through the legal challenge that inevitably will come. For instance, it's one of the reasons why the David Valadao seat in the Central Valley, which is a Voting Rights Act district, only gains, I think, about 3 more points of Democrat registration. In my view, that remains still a very competitive seat, because that's as far as you could go with the needle in a seat like that.
Right.
So we're starting to get a little technical. The point being is, I think for what the assignment was, these maps actually make a lot of sense, and it does not completely scramble everything. Now, the political reason for that is you have a lot of Democrat incumbents who have given up some Democrat registration that didn't necessarily want to be cast away from where they lived or where they've traditionally represented. So you couldn't have a complete redo. This is all adjustments, more or less, of what already existed.
Thank you. We're going to go to the audience, and so and if there aren't any questions, I have more, but I understand this audience may have questions, and so several things. Please raise your hand, and a PPIC person will bring the microphone to you. As Deborah said, we never let go of the mic. Please state your name, and if you're with an organization, please let us know. And ask your question to the panel. And please speak loudly and a little bit slow, because it's kind of hard to hear up here, and the lights are really bright. So please raise your hand, and our folks come to you. And here we go. Thank you. Thank you, Jerica.
Hi, my name is Theo Strauss, and I'm with, stand up, and I'm with McClatchy High School. This is a question for Rob specifically. I would like to hear your reasoning on why you think that the Democrats in this situation have to be the bigger people. We've seen across, I mean, not just this administration, but during the Biden administration and the first Trump administration, that the Republican Party does not like to be the bigger person, and that the Republican Party currently is violating people's civil rights among every other type of right. Why is it the Democrats who have to try to be this better person here? We see that it's just not fair in the country currently how everything has been going down. And with Texas and other states trying to gerrymander, the Democrats are going to be losing these seats and losing these seats and losing these seats. And the 42% of Democrats who voted for Kamala Harris in the past presidential election are going to be losing their representation in Texas. Why is it not fair for the Democrats to be doing this in California now?
So, excellent. I appreciate your question very much. Articulated well. So, I'll go back to what I said. I don't blame the Democrats for doing this. So, I'm not suggesting that Gavin Newsom and Nancy Pelosi and all the Democrat leaders of California should stand down. Like I said, I don't blame Newsom for doing it. If I was a Newsom advisor, I'd be telling him, yeah, you gotta go do this. If this had been the other way around 20 years ago, you know, I would have been encouraging my boss Schwarzenegger to do this, right? If all those dynamics you described were just flipped around. Really, the question is for the voters. And I do think you have to, let's just accept a premise that Trump is a low denominator in our political culture. I'm a Republican, but I've never voted for him for president, okay? So, you know, destroying norms, you know, dividing the country, all those things. Let's just for the sake of answering this, let's accept that as this low denominator. I think what voters have to ask is, though, is he then reshaping all of our politics? You know, are the Democrats been dragged down all the way down to this low denominator? So when a governor is basically mimicking the cruelty, the sarcasm, the vulgarity of Trump's communication, well, who's really winning and redefining our politics writ large, and how do you start to come back from that? So I do think, so the question is really for the voters, not for the Democrats to pull back and not do this. It's about political power. They should seek their political power. This is the question of the voters, is like, are we just going to keep sinking down to this low denominator that Trump has brought American politics to, and even American government to? That becomes the question, because then how do you come back from that? So when Democrats gain power again, are they going to elevate us, or are they going to adhere to these new norms that have been created by this administration in this era of MAGA Republican politics? That's a big question, but I think that's the question for the voters, not necessarily for Democrats, who are, by design, supposed to be pursuing their own political interests.
Thank you. Middle of the room. Let's get Giselle. Can you get a mic? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. All right. You, sir, I think the lady hears you. I don't think you hear her. I was in law enforcement for almost 35 years. Masked cops in America make my guts churn. The funding level at which they are funded galls me. You're assuming there's going to be a tomorrow for this democracy. I'm not clear that that's the case. This guy is a vicious, vicious threat, the guy who's in the White House right now. I wish you understood that. I don't think you get it. I don't think you get what a lot of us feel.
Do you have a question, sir?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm ranting. How can you stand it? You're a conservative. I value that in you. I am too. You know, I don't understand how your values will permit you to say, it'll be all right. Things are going to work out. How does that happen inside your head?
So obviously, a charged commentary. Not sure there was a question, but I'll respond. I'll respond this way. Well, so if there's a conscience
Order.
involved, I believe I've expressed it. I think I just did it when I addressed this young man's question over here. Do I believe there'll be a government tomorrow? I do. But I ask you this, actually I'm not asking you because I don't want you to answer, is, because other people may have questions, does this really deliver? Okay, so it seems to me you're accepting the premise of Governor Newsom and his ad saying this will stop Donald Trump cold. How does it do that? It creates gridlock, which usually Americans choose in midterm elections. It probably incites another impeachment of Donald Trump, okay, if there's a Democrat majority. And I can tell you how that's going to go in the Senate. So we're going to go through that again, whether justified or not. So what does this really do at the end of the day? You know, there's reasons for, you know, to get to gridlock and have Democrat control by a narrow margin in the House, but it doesn't stop all this stuff that you may not like about this administration. It doesn't deliver that, does not pack that type of punch.
On the left side of the room then, Yancey, you have a person with a question?
Andrew Saunders, retired businessman, City of Citrus Heights. So I have more of an analogy that I'd like comments on. So it's football season right now. When football teams lose, generally they change the coach, they change the teams, they change the game strategy. They don't petition the league to change the rules of the game. How do you feel about that analogy? Because that's what I feel is happening with this particular election.
I'll try that
Gail,
one.
you try.
I don't believe that analogy works here. I think this is a much bigger analogy than that. I mean, it's a bigger issue than that. And while I haven't stepped in on Rob's comments, I just want to say to both the young man here and the gentleman in the back of the room, this really isn't about, is this going to make things better? No one is suggesting that it will. We're all experiencing, as you've brought up, things we've never seen, at least in my lifetime. I won't speak for all of you. So this is a moment where you have an opportunity. And I was very serious when I said this is about Congress. This is about giving Congress back the rights to actually legislate. So if you want a reason other than just pure power, look at that. The reason the Republicans are doing this is because they want to maintain total power. There is no pushback unless this passes and we, in fact, win in 26. It doesn't end with November, but it gives an opportunity, at least, for a more even election in 26 nationally, where Democrats have some ability to potentially get back one, if not both, of the houses, and then be able to push back effectively.
And briefly, I agree, it doesn't quite work. Nice try, though, because this is all happening
Close.
within the rules. The analogy
Right.
doesn't quite work, because everything that's being done is within the rules.
Right.
But, you know, a fundamental thing about American democracy, I mean, this is what, you know, Locke talked about it when we were just a theory, is you still have to adhere to some norms. You still have to proceed in good conscience on a lot of these types of things. So it's all in the rules. Maybe it's more like the tush push, and we need a rule change. Football fans got that. I'm not going to explain it to anyone else. You can see me after class. But it's like, you know, that's all within the rules, but maybe that's not such a good idea, and we should change the rules.
We have a question online before I go back to you, Yancey. Abby.
Thanks, Tawny. Interesting question from a member of our online audience. Prop 50 is designed to promote a deeper leaning into Democratic Party representation in California. Are there any benefits, though, here in California or in other states, to a hyper-partisan electorate compared to a more competitive electorate?
Benefit to bipartisan or less?
Understand, so benefit to there being hyper majority? Well, I suppose if there's a Democrat president and after the 28 election, and there may be some benefit. The bacon that could come home.
To be honest, I'm so focused on today and living through tomorrow. I don't know that I can project much further than that. There's so much at risk. But I'm not sure that this would promote that. The one thing we really haven't talked about is how many independent voters there are in California, and they will be voting as well. So while we've talked Democrats, Republicans, I think this actually will afford independent voters an opportunity to speak out as well. And so I don't know that this would actually promote or establish a hyper-partisan anything.
Eric, I think you might have a number about nonpartisan voters.
Well, yeah, so I mean, well, I was actually thinking about how this really brings up the kind of weirdness of congressional redistricting. So each state is drawing its own lines, but those districts then feed into a national body. And so it is absolutely possible to simultaneously draw a plan that does not represent your own state very well and that makes things at the national level fairer. I think in terms of Texas versus California, those numbers are, by themselves, are actually pretty small. But it's sort of the broader fight that might spiral. But it does emerge from this weirdness about congressional redistricting specifically, where you can, you're simultaneously representing your own state and also sort of representing the whole country, and that creates all kinds of strange dynamics.
And California has like approximately 30% independent or no PP?
Yeah, and so in terms of the independents, it's more like 25, something like that. In terms of registration, the independents and or no party preference in California, they tend to lean Democratic, so they aren't necessarily purely swing voters, and that explains how over the last 40 years, as the state has, as the number of no party preference or decline to state or independent or whatever you want to call them, as that number has increased, the state has actually moved in a Democratic direction, not in any other direction. So, but there are certainly more swing voters in that no party preference category than in either the Democrat or Republican category.
Thank you. I'm going to go back through the room, starting again on the left. Yancey.
My name is Brendan. Thank you to the PPIC and to our speakers for today's event. Given Prop 50 is on the ballot during an off-year election, not during a midterm or a presidential, I was curious if we could talk about the impact that voter turnout will have on the success or failure of the proposition.
That's a good question.
Thank you. Excellent. Anyone want to speak to this? I know, Eric, you've done some work here too, but Rob?
I'll take a run at it, because this is for the consultants, this is the big question. It's what we're trying to figure out. So there's no comp, really, for this special election for a statewide ballot measure. The last special statewide election we had was in 21, which is the gubernatorial recall. We saw pretty good turnout because we're all vote-by-mail state. Everyone was getting a ballot. And by then, everyone had kind of gone back to their partisan corners and were ready to turn in a ballot for their team. So the question becomes, is this participation, because turnout almost isn't the right term, it's really participation. Fill out the ballot, put it in an envelope, and send it back. Does it mirror something like that? We'll start to get a better idea here over the next couple of weeks when we see the returns start to come in and we can see where they're allocated by party. My theory, and I'm actually curious what Gail thinks here, my theory is the higher the turnout, the more likely that this may fail, because it is a base Democrat turnout election, and those voters are going to vote. And the more non-partisan engaged voters vote, it may dilute their vote. If I was the no campaign, back to our no party preference voters, our independents, in the 21 election, and also in the 22 general election, which had a lower turnout than the 21 special, while independents or the MPPs are 25% of the registration, they were only 18% of proportion of the turnout of who voted. If I'm on the no side, I really want to see that get up into the low 20s. And if it doesn't, I think they're probably in trouble. So if you can, there's trackers out there that are available. Keep an eye on that independent line, the MPP line, as the ballots start to come in the next couple of weeks, is what I'll be watching.
Gail, you get the last word. We're at
Oh,
time.
my goodness. I have the same problems with potentially what the turnout's going to be. It's everybody's nervousness is because everybody's got a ballot, there's only one thing on it. You would think people would be able to figure out how to go forward. But this is a process kind of question. It's complicated. You can tell by what we said that not everybody gets up in the morning and talks about gerrymandering and redistricting. So,
Even though they should. Right?
of course, we would
some of
like
us
them
do.
to, and all of you have to from now on. But turnout is the real question. Participation is the real issue. From everything I've seen, it appears that Prop 50 is better known than you would think. And not just because there's media attention to it or paid media. So I do think the panic on some moment, a Democratic side and nonpartisan side, and some Republicans about what's going on in this country is focusing people. But boy, I don't think it will get to the level of, so let's see how I am, of what the turnout was for the recall. That was a very high special election turnout.
We would love to take more of your questions, but the reality is we rent this space and they expect us out at a certain time. It's just the rules that we're playing by for our speaker series event. So while we appreciate that you have questions, we just can't take them at this time, but I and the rest of us at PPIC, and I hope all of you, are so incredibly grateful to have had the input of these experts and the candidness that is truly unique to have, and PPIC is proud to bring it to you. So big round of applause for this panel. One last thing too, we ask that you fill out the survey to let us know maybe how we can do better in some way, or even things you'd like to see in the future for PPIC Speaker Series. Thank you to the McClatchy High School students and the Cal Civics program that brings you here. Thank you to the teacher. Thank you, Professor Wong. Have a great day. Thank you.